Klay tapped her pencil against her textbook, a sense of frustration bubbling inside her. Noli Me Tangere, Rizal's famous novel, seemed like an insurmountable wall of words. Her eyelids felt heavy and the letters blurred together on the page. She just couldn't connect with the dated language and the historical context. All around her, classmates were absorbed in their studies, but Klay felt lost. Why did she have to study this old book anyway? What relevance could it possibly have to her life? Klay glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost midnight. She had been staring at the same page for an hour, and she still hadn't made any progress. With a sigh, she pushed the book away and decided to call it a night. Maybe a fresh start in the morning would help. But deep down, she knew that she needed more than just a good night's sleep. She needed a way to make this book come alive. The next day in class, Klay's professor, Mr. Santos, was passionately discussing the social and political climate of the Philippines during Rizal's time. He spoke of oppression, of injustice, of the yearning for freedom. Klay listened intently, trying to connect the dots between the dry historical facts and the characters in the novel. For the first time, she started to see the relevance of Rizal's work. Maybe this wasn't just an old book after all. Maybe it held a message that was still relevant today. Inspired by Mr. Santos's lecture, Klay decided to give Noli Me Tangere another chance. This time, she wouldn't just read the words. She would try to understand the world that Rizal was trying to portray. She went to the library and checked out several books on Philippine history and culture during the Spanish colonial period. She wanted to immerse herself in the sights, sounds, and smells of that era. She wanted to understand the hopes, dreams, and struggles of the people who lived through it. Armed with a newfound determination, Klay curled up on her couch with her copy of Noli Me Tangere. She started reading, this time paying close attention to the details. She imagined herself walking through the bustling streets of Manila, feeling the heat of the sun on her skin and hearing the chatter of the crowd around her. She pictured the grand houses of the wealthy Filipinos and the humble huts of the poor. Slowly but surely, the world of Noli Me Tangere began to come alive in her mind. As she delved deeper into the story, Klay found herself drawn to the characters. There was Crisostomo Ibarra, the idealistic young man who returned to the Philippines after years of studying abroad, only to be confronted with the harsh realities of his homeland. There was Maria Clara, the beautiful and virtuous woman who was promised to Ibarra but was torn between her love for him and her duty to her family. And then there was Father Damaso, the arrogant and abusive Spanish friar who represented the worst excesses of colonial rule. Klay read late into the night, completely engrossed in the story. She felt Ibarra's frustration at the corruption and injustice he encountered. She shared Maria Clara's pain and confusion as she was caught in the crossfire of political and social forces beyond her control. She seethed with anger at Father Damaso's cruelty and hypocrisy. For the first time, Klay understood the power of literature to transport the reader to another time and place, to make them feel the emotions of characters who lived centuries ago. As the night wore on, Klay felt a strange sensation wash over her. It was as if the words on the page were starting to swirl around her, pulling her into the book. She tried to shake off the feeling, but it was no use. The room around her began to fade, and the characters from the novel seemed to step out of the pages and into her reality. Klay closed her eyes, hoping that it was just a figment of her imagination. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer in her cozy living room. She was standing in a cobblestone street, surrounded by buildings with balconies made of dark wood. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar spices and the sound of horse-drawn carriages clattering over the uneven pavement. Klay's heart pounded in her chest as she realized that something incredible had happened. She had somehow been transported into the world of Noli Me Tangere. Klay's senses were overwhelmed. The sights, sounds, and smells of 19th century Philippines were a far cry from her modern life. She touched the rough wall of a nearby building, feeling the texture of sun-baked stone. A wave of dizziness hit her, and she leaned against the wall for support. This was too real to be a dream. She had to be dreaming, right? A group of women in long flowing skirts walked past, their voices a mixture of Spanish and Tagalog. Klay caught snippets of their conversation, but she couldn't understand everything. She needed to find someone who could explain what was happening. But who could she trust in this unfamiliar world? Taking a deep breath, Klay decided to explore her surroundings. She had to start somewhere. As she walked, she noticed the stark contrast between the grandeur of some buildings and the poverty reflected in others. It was like stepping into the pages of the novel, seeing the social injustices Rizal described firsthand. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized a familiar figure in the distance. It was Crisostomo Ibarra, looking just as she had pictured him. He was engaged in a heated discussion with a Spanish official, his face a mask of frustration. Klay wanted to call out to him, to warn him about the dangers that lay ahead, but something held her back. What if her presence here altered the course of events? Klay decided to observe from a distance, hoping to learn more about this world before revealing herself. She followed Ibarra discreetly, her mind racing with questions. How did she get here? Was she just a passive observer? Or could she interact with this world? And most importantly, could she change the tragic fate that awaited Ibarra and the other characters? As Klay watched Ibarra, she noticed a young woman standing nearby, her eyes fixed on him with a mixture of admiration and concern. She was breathtakingly beautiful, with long flowing hair and a gentle smile. Klay instantly recognized her as Maria Clara, the object of Ibarra's affections. Seeing them together, Klay felt a pang of sadness, knowing the heartbreak that awaited them. Later that day, Klay found herself outside a grand church, the sound of hymns spilling out into the street. She slipped inside, captivated by the ornate decorations and the air of solemnity. As she looked around, she spotted Father Damaso, his face contorted in a sneer as he addressed a group of parishioners. Klay's blood ran cold. She had only read about his cruelty, but seeing it in person filled her with a visceral disgust. Klay's mind raced as she tried to make sense of her situation. She was trapped in a world on the brink of turmoil, surrounded by characters she had only read about. She knew their stories, their hopes, and their dreams, but she also knew their tragic ends. Could she use her knowledge to change their fates? Or was she destined to watch helplessly as history unfolded before her eyes? Section 5. A modern girl in a colonial world. Klay quickly realized that navigating this new world wouldn't be easy. Her modern clothing and mannerisms made her stand out like a sore thumb. She attracted curious stares and whispers wherever she went. She needed to blend in, to learn the customs and social graces of this era. But how could she do that without raising suspicion? She sought refuge in a quiet park, hoping to gather her thoughts. As she sat on a bench, she noticed a group of children playing a game that seemed vaguely familiar. She approached them cautiously, trying to decipher their words. To her surprise, they were speaking Tagalog, a language she had only studied briefly in her Filipino class. Klay decided to take a chance. She greeted the children with a hesitant "Kumusta?" To her relief, they responded with smiles and a flurry of Tagalog that she could barely understand. They seemed more curious than afraid of her. Klay spent the afternoon with the children, teaching them some English words in exchange for lessons in Tagalog. It was a small step, but it gave her hope that she could adapt to this new world. As the days turned into nights, Klay found herself drawn into the rhythms of life in 19th century Philippines. She learned to appreciate the slower pace of life, the importance of family and community, and the simple pleasures that came from sharing meals and stories with others. She also witnessed firsthand the stark realities of Spanish colonial rule, the abuse of power, the exploitation of the Filipino people, and the stifling of their culture and identity. Klay's initial fear and confusion gradually gave way to a sense of purpose. She couldn't just stand by and watch as history repeated itself. She had to do something, anything to help. But what could one person, even someone armed with knowledge of the future, do to change the course of events? Section 6. Klay's attempts to change fate. Klay knew that directly interfering with major events could have unintended consequences. She had to tread carefully, to find subtle ways to influence the characters and their choices. Her first target was Ibarra. She believed that if she could warn him about the dangers that awaited him, perhaps he could avoid his tragic fate. She began leaving him anonymous notes, hinting at the conspiracies brewing against him and urging him to be cautious. She even tried to subtly warn him about the true nature of Father Damaso, hoping to sow seeds of doubt in his mind. But Ibarra, blinded by his idealism and his trust in those around him, seemed not to notice the warnings or dismissed them as the work of jealous rivals. Klay's attempts to influence Maria Clara proved even more challenging. Maria Clara was trapped in a society that dictated her every move, a society that valued obedience and submission above all else. Klay tried to instill in her a sense of independence, to encourage her to think for herself and to fight for her own happiness. But Maria Clara, bound by duty and tradition, found it difficult to break free from the expectations of her family and her social circle. Frustrated but undeterred, Klay turned her attention to the plight of the Filipino people. She used her knowledge of history to subtly plant ideas of resistance and reform. She spoke to anyone who would listen about the importance of education, the need for unity among Filipinos, and the inherent rights of all people to freedom and self-determination. She knew that these seeds of change might not bear fruit immediately, but she hoped that they would take root and eventually blossom into a movement for change. Section 7. The weight of Spanish colonial rule. As Klay immersed herself in the lives of those around her, she gained a deeper understanding of the pervasive impact of Spanish colonial rule. It wasn't just about political control, it was about the systematic dismantling of Filipino culture, the suppression of their language and traditions, and the constant reminder of their supposed inferiority. She witnessed the arrogance of Spanish officials who treated Filipinos with disdain, the hypocrisy of friars who preached love and compassion while enriching themselves at the expense of their flock, and the crushing poverty that plagued the majority of the population. She saw how the colonial system had created a society rife with inequality, where opportunity and justice were privileges reserved for the few. Klay felt a surge of anger at the injustices she witnessed. She had read about this period in history books, but nothing could have prepared her for the raw, visceral experience of living it. The sights, sounds, and smells of oppression were all around her, a constant reminder of the human cost of colonialism. She realized that her initial goal of changing the fates of individual characters was perhaps too narrow. The real challenge lay in addressing the systemic issues that allowed such injustices to flourish. It was about empowering the Filipino people to fight for their own liberation, to reclaim their stolen heritage, and to build a future free from oppression. Section 8. Seeds of Rebellion and the Fight for Freedom. Despite the oppressive atmosphere, Klay saw glimmers of hope. She met Filipinos who dared to dream of a different future, who whispered of rebellion and reform in hushed tones. She witnessed acts of quiet resistance, small but significant victories against the colonial machine. She saw it in the eyes of students who devoured knowledge forbidden by their Spanish overlords, in the clandestine meetings of intellectuals and artists who used their craft to critique the status quo, and in the unwavering spirit of ordinary Filipinos who refused to be defined by their colonial status. Klay realized that the fight for freedom wasn't just about armed rebellion. It was about challenging the very foundations of colonial rule, about reclaiming the narrative, and about asserting one's humanity in the face of oppression. It was a fight that took place in classrooms, in churches, in homes, and in the streets. It was a fight for the soul of a nation. Inspired by the courage and resilience of those around her, Klay continued to plant seeds of change, knowing that even small acts of defiance could have a ripple effect. She shared her knowledge of history, hoping to inspire others to learn from the past and to fight for a better future. She encouraged critical thinking, urging people to question the status quo and to envision a different reality. Klay knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but she also knew that the Filipino people were more than capable of achieving their freedom. They had a rich history, a vibrant culture, and an indomitable spirit. They just needed to be reminded of their own strength. Section 9. A Farewell to the Past. As time passed, Klay felt the pull of her own time growing stronger. She knew that she couldn't stay in the world of Noli Me Tangere forever. She had to return to her own life, to her own time. But she couldn't leave without saying goodbye to the people who had touched her heart, the people who had shown her the true meaning of courage, resilience, and the fight for freedom. She sought out Ibarra, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what awaited him. She couldn't change his fate, but she could at least offer him words of comfort and support. She found him at the ruins of his dream project, his spirit broken but not extinguished. She spoke to him of hope, of the enduring power of his ideals, and of the countless others who would carry on his fight. She visited Maria Clara, who was preparing to enter the convent, her spirit crushed by the weight of societal expectations. Klay reminded her of her own strength, of the fire that still burned within her, and of the possibility of finding happiness on her own terms. She urged her to never give up on her dreams, no matter how impossible they might seem. Finally, Klay sought out the children she had befriended in the park. She had grown to love them like her own, and she knew that she would miss their laughter and their innocent wisdom. She showered them with hugs and gifts, promising to never forget them. As she looked into their bright, hopeful eyes, she realized that they were the future, the generation that would inherit the fight for a better Philippines. Section 10. Returning with New Eyes. Klay closed her eyes, feeling a familiar dizziness wash over her. When she opened them again, she was back in her own time, in her own living room. The book lay open on the floor, the pages wrinkled from her grip. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the words that had transported her to another world. The world around her seemed different now, somehow brighter, sharper. The humdrum of her everyday life seemed trivial compared to the struggles she had witnessed. She had walked in the shoes of heroes and villains. She had felt the weight of history on her shoulders, and she had emerged from the experience forever changed. Klay looked at her reflection in the window. She saw a different person staring back at her, someone stronger, more compassionate, more aware of the world around her. She was no longer the apathetic student who had struggled to connect with Rizal's words. She was now a witness to history, a keeper of memories, and an advocate for justice. She knew that she could never forget her time in the world of Noli Me Tangere. It had been a journey of self-discovery, a crash course in Philippine history, and a powerful reminder of the enduring relevance of Rizal's message. She had gone in search of answers, and she had emerged with a newfound appreciation for the complexities of the past and the interconnectedness of all people. Section 11. The Enduring Legacy of Rizal. Klay returned to her studies with a renewed sense of purpose. She devoured Rizal's works, no longer seeing them as dusty relics of the past, but as timeless commentaries on the human condition. She recognized the characters, the themes, and the social injustices that she had witnessed firsthand. She understood now why Rizal's writings had resonated so deeply with generations of Filipinos. He had given voice to their struggles, exposed the hypocrisy of their oppressors, and ignited a fire for freedom that continued to burn brightly. He had shown them that they were not alone, that their fight was just, and that a better future was possible. Klay knew that she had a responsibility to share what she had learned, to keep Rizal's legacy alive for future generations. She became an active member of her school's Filipino club, organizing events and discussions about Rizal's life and works. She volunteered at a local community center, teaching Filipino history and culture to children. She realized that the fight for freedom and justice didn't end with Rizal's death. It was an ongoing struggle, a relay race passed down from one generation to the next, and she was determined to do her part to carry the torch forward. She would honor Rizal's memory by living a life guided by his principles, a life of integrity, compassion, and a relentless pursuit of a more just and equitable world. Klay's journey through the pages of Noli Me Tangere had been more than just an academic exercise. It had been a transformative experience, a pilgrimage to the heart of Philippine history, and a call to action. She had gone in search of Rizal, and she had found herself.